murderers to be given whole life orders. But I'm wondering, especially considering some of this might even come into force retrospectively, how on earth this is going to work. And to help me pick through that, I will be joined by everybody's favourite barrister. It is, of course, Stephen Barrett. Patrick Christie's on GB News, Britain's News Channel. Welcome back. It's 4:48. You're watching or listening to me, Patrick Christie's on GB News. At 5, I will get reaction to Suella Braverman's big conference speech. Nigel Farage was very unhappy with it. He made the point that she didn't mention the ECHR once, and that is the issue on many people's lips here at conference. He said it was weak. He said it was poor. However, a procession of Conservative MPs have said the exact opposite, so we'll continue that discussion. But this is another big issue that went underreported earlier on. Justice Secretary Alex Chalk has announced reforms to how whole life orders are applied. Now, it means that murderers who carry out sexually motivated attacks will automatically face a whole life sentence, even if they were charged before the new law is introduced. Justice Secretary Alex Chalk says that for the most dangerous and depraved killers, life really should mean life.
Now becomes the default, so it's what should happen, unless, of course, the judge decides there are exceptional circumstances. And we think that puts the law in the right place, that meets the instincts of the British people, and, as I say, does justice and provides, you know, a crumb of comfort for families after the most appalling crimes that they feel justice is truly being served.
I'm joined now by barrister and writer Stephen Barrett. Stephen, thank you very much. I suspect that to a lot of people watching and listening to this, that will sound like good law. That will sound like proper justice. What's your view? Is it even possible?
Well, that's the important question, because I would worry that the airwaves will very soon be full of political lawyers or lawyers who give political opinions, each saying whether they like this or not. And I'm not going to say whether I like this or not. I'm going to say that it's lawful. And what the tension is there's a very old tension here. So neither you nor I would want an incoming government next year to pass a law saying that anybody who's been on the telly has committed a criminal offence and is going to prison for life. We wouldn't want that, would we? That, you know, we'd both be hoisted by our own petards. We'd be in prison for life. And there is a fundamental tenet of our law. It's a tenet, it's the word I use, principle, that you don't create a historic offence. Now, when we recreated Europe after the Second World War, we decided to give them a list of these tenets. And over time, they've morphed into law, and they've morphed into enforceable rules via the Human Rights Act and via the human courts. But we put this tenet that you shouldn't create a brand new offence and punish people retrospectively. By the way, the people wanted that because before that, the Norman overlords had been so horrendous that they had just been inventing new things and throwing you in the oubliette whenever they felt like it. So, you know, there was a real need in sort of English national history to have this as a principle. And then we gave it to the Europeans. We gave it as Article 7 of the Human Rights Convention. But then because of the creation of a court, it's all come back to us as law. Now, as law, and I want your listeners, I want your viewers to understand that. There's a difference between a tenet or a general principle and a law. A general principle is something that you enforce 99% of the time. A law is something you have to follow 100% of the time. Now, that might sound better.
Stephen, that's an important thing. Let me just cut across there, because that's an important moment, OK? So what Alex Chalk, the Justice Secretary, was saying there, my understanding was that if somebody murders somebody in a sexually motivated attack, they would have to face a whole life tariff. Is that right?
Well, no, he did explain that the judge will have some discretion. And so what they're not doing is inventing a new crime of murder. So there's a bit of a tension in the human rights bit, because when we translated it into all of these languages, we used the word penalty. And that caused a massive court case that came about, it was actually this year that they fixed it, where the judges did manage to work out that actually this sort of stuff is perfectly legal. You're not creating a new offence, you're just changing the punishment. And that too is quite important, because if you go into sort of this brittle, this absolute position of you can never have retrospective law, well, for a start, that's difficult for taxation, because we do it in taxation law quite often. Secondly, morals and feelings change. So with historic sex offences in particular, you know, in the past, we didn't take them very seriously. Do you really want people punished to lesser standards? You know, and the other one, by the way, that's always good on historic sex offences, is that we've invented this thing called the Sex Offenders Register. Now, we wouldn't want to be in a position where anybody who committed a crime before that register was invented didn't have to go on it, because we want the register now so that we can keep an eye on them. So you don't have this general principle that retrospective laws are banned. You have a sort of, we've got it back through the cleverness of our judges. We've got it back to being a sort of an understandable or more tolerable situation. But the problem and the expense of the court case and the period of confusion, that's because rather than just admitting we've always had a general tenet of our law that you can't create a brand new offence, we reinvented the wheel with the Human Rights Act. And we reinvented, justiciability by submitting ourselves to Strasbourg. This time, luckily, Strasbourg got it right. I mean, it's always a bit like playing with a loaded gun whenever you mess with Strasbourg. So, what they're proposing will be law.
All right. Stephen, thank you very much. Always great to have your legal wisdom, Stephen.